Emma Rodriguez never imagined that changing clothes after PE class would become the nightmare that nearly destroyed her senior year. When Ashley Parker and her crew secretly photographed Emma in the locker room and plastered those images across every social media platform at Riverside High, they thought they were just humiliating another quiet new girl. What they didn't know was that Emma had been kickboxing since she was 8 years old, holding 5 consecutive state championships in Arizona, and her father had trained her not just to fight, but to protect herself and others from predators. Sometimes the person you choose to victimize is exactly the wrong person to mess with. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The October rain drummed steadily against the windows of Riverside High School as Emma Rodriguez navigated the crowded hallway between second and third period. At 16, she had perfected the art of moving through crowds without drawing attention to herself. Her dark, curly hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her oversized hoodie concealed the lean, muscular frame that had earned her recognition in kickboxing rings across Arizona just months earlier. Emma kept her eyes forward as she made her way to her chemistry class, her backpack slung over one shoulder. The conversations swirling around her were the typical mix of weekend plans, relationship drama, and complaints about upcoming tests. She had been at Riverside High for exactly 3 weeks now, ever since her father Carlos had accepted a construction management position with a company in Cedar Falls, Oregon. The small town of 25,000 people was a dramatic change from the sprawling suburbs of Phoenix, but Emma had learned to adapt quickly to new environments. What her new classmates at Riverside High didn't know, what nobody in Cedar Falls knew except her family, was that Emma Rodriguez was one of the most accomplished young martial artists in the southwestern United States. She had started training in kickboxing at the age of 8 when her father, himself a former amateur competitor, had enrolled her in classes at a local gym. What began as a way to build confidence and discipline had evolved into something extraordinary. Emma had won her first tournament at age 10, defeating girls 2 years older with a combination of technical precision and natural athletic ability that impressed even seasoned coaches. By the time she was 13, she was competing at the state level, and by 15, she had claimed 5 consecutive Arizona state championships in her weight class. College scouts had started taking notice, and several universities had already expressed interest in her joining their martial arts programs. The trophies, medals, and championship belts were carefully packed away in boxes in her new bedroom, along with the newspaper clippings that documented her rise through the competitive ranks. Her father had been clear about their approach to this new start in Oregon. Emma was to focus on her academics, make friends, and try to have a normal teenage experience. The intense training schedule and constant competition had consumed much of her adolescence, and Carlos Rodriguez wanted his daughter to have the chance to simply be a regular high school student. Emma understood her father's reasoning, but she also missed the clarity and purpose that came with training. In the ring, everything made sense. There were rules, techniques, and clear objectives. Success was measured by skill, dedication, and heart, not by the arbitrary social hierarchies that seemed to govern high school life. She missed the early morning training sessions, the sound of gloves hitting heavy bags, and the respect that came from her fellow competitors who understood the discipline required to excel in martial arts. As she slipped into her chemistry class and took her usual seat in the back row, Emma reflected on how different her life had become. Back in Phoenix, she had been known and respected. Her coaches treated her as a serious athlete. Her training partners pushed her to improve, and even her academic teachers understood that she was balancing a demanding competition schedule with her studies. Here at Riverside High, she was just another quiet transfer student trying to blend in. The chemistry lesson began with Mr. Patterson explaining molecular structures, but Emma found her attention drifting. Through the rain-streaked windows, she could see the school's athletic fields where various sports teams practiced after school. She wondered if Riverside High had any martial arts programs, though she hadn't seen any mentioned in the student handbook. Her father had suggested she might look into the school's sports offerings once she had settled in academically, but Emma wasn't sure she was ready to reveal that side of herself yet. The bell rang, signaling the end of third period, and Emma gathered her materials slowly, allowing most of her classmates to file out before she stood up. This had become her routine over the past 3 weeks, a way to avoid the crush of students in the hallways and minimize her interactions with others. She had learned that being invisible was often the safest strategy when navigating new social environments. As she walked toward the cafeteria for lunch, Emma noticed the familiar clustering of students around their established social groups. The athletic kids dominated the tables near the windows, their letterman jackets and team sweatshirts marking their territory. The drama club and debate team members had claimed their section near the stage area, often engaged in animated discussions about their latest productions or competitions. The academic achievers, recognizable by their advanced placement textbooks and college prep materials, had established themselves at the tables closest to the library entrance. Emma had tried sitting with different groups during her first week, but the conversations felt forced, and she sensed that her presence was more tolerated than welcomed. She had settled into a routine of sitting alone at one of the smaller tables near the back of the cafeteria, using the time to review her notes or read ahead in her textbooks. It wasn't ideal, but it was comfortable in its predictability. Today, however, as Emma approached her usual table, she noticed that someone was already sitting there. A boy with sandy brown hair and an easy smile looked up from his lunch and waved her over. Emma hesitated, unsure whether this was a mistake or an invitation. "Hey, you're Emma, right?" the boy said as she approached. "I'm Jake Williams. I think we have biology together fourth period." His voice was friendly without the edge of mockery or pity that Emma had come to expect from her classmates. Emma nodded, still standing with her lunch tray. "Yeah, that's right. Sorry, is this your table? I can find somewhere else to sit." Jake shook his head and gestured to the empty chair across from him. "No, I usually sit over there," he pointed to a table where several other students were engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion about video games. "But I thought you might want some company. Being the new kid can be pretty rough, especially at a place like Riverside." There was something genuine in Jake's tone that made Emma relax slightly. She set down her tray and took the seat across from him. "Thanks, you said you've been the new kid before?" "3 times, Jake replied with a laugh. "My dad's in the military, so we moved around a lot before he retired, and we settled here 2 years ago. I remember what it was like trying to figure out where I fit in, especially in a school where everyone's known each other since kindergarten." Emma found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. "It's definitely different from my old school. Phoenix is so big that there were always new students coming and going. Here, I feel like everyone stops talking when I walk by." "They do," Jake said matter-of-factly, taking a bite of his sandwich. "But it's not necessarily because they don't like you. Riverside is a pretty small town, and honestly, not much exciting happens here. A new student, especially one who transfers in the middle of the semester, is automatically interesting. They're probably just curious about your story." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma considered this perspective. In her experience, curiosity from teenagers often led to unwanted attention and invasive questions. She had developed a reflexive wariness about sharing too much personal information, especially about her background in competitive fighting. People had a tendency to either dismiss her achievements because of her size and quiet demeanor, or they became overly fascinated with the idea of a teenage girl who could in Jake's words, probably kick their ass. What about you? Emma asked, steering the conversation away from herself. What's your story, besides being a military kid, I mean? Jake leaned back in his chair, apparently comfortable with the question. Pretty boring, actually. I'm into photography and computer programming. I work on the school newspaper and help maintain the website. I'm not really into sports or drama or any of the typical high school scenes. I guess I'm what you'd call a creative introvert. Emma found Jake's honesty refreshing. Most of her classmates seemed to define themselves by their social status or their opposition to it. Jake appeared comfortable simply being himself without the need to prove anything to anyone. Photography sounds interesting, Emma said. Do you do portraits or more like nature stuff? Both, really. I like capturing moments that tell stories. The newspaper work is mostly event coverage, but in my free time I prefer candid shots of people when they're not posing. There's something authentic about those unguarded moments. As they continued talking, Emma felt some of the tension she had been carrying for weeks begin to ease. Jake asked questions without prying, shared information about the school's culture, without gossiping, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her as a person rather than as a curiosity. For the first time since arriving in Cedar Falls, Emma began to think that maybe she could find her place at Riverside High after all. The comfortable atmosphere of their conversation was interrupted by the sound of loud laughter from across the cafeteria. Emma looked up to see a group of 3 girls at one of the central tables, their heads bent together over a smartphone. The girl in the center had long blonde hair and was wearing what appeared to be designer clothing. Her 2 companions, one Asian and one Latina, were clearly hanging on her every word. That's Ashley Parker, Jake said quietly, following Emma's gaze. She's basically the unofficial queen of Riverside High. The girl with the black hair is Brittany Chun, and the other one is Madison Torres. They're Ashley's constant companions. Emma watched as Ashley held up her phone, apparently showing something to her friends that prompted another round of laughter. There was something about the quality of their amusement that made Emma uncomfortable. A cruelty that reminded her of predators circling prey. They seem popular, Emma observed neutrally. Jake made a face. Popular isn't the word I'd use. Influential, maybe. Ashley's family has money, and she's got this way of making people feel like they need her approval. She's also got a pretty active social media presence, which gives her a lot of power in the school's social ecosystem. Emma nodded, making a mental note to avoid catching Ashley Parker's attention. In her experience, people who needed to demonstrate their power over others were often the most dangerous to be around. She had learned to recognize the signs of bullying behavior early, and something about Ashley's demeanor raised red flags. The lunch period was coming to an end, and students were beginning to clear their tables and prepare for afternoon classes. Emma stood up to throw away her trash, grateful for the pleasant conversation with Jake. Hey, Jake said as they prepared to leave the cafeteria. Would you maybe want to sit together again tomorrow? I mean, if you don't have other plans or anything. Emma felt a genuine smile cross her face. I'd like that. Thanks for the company today. As they parted ways in the hallway, Emma felt lighter than she had in weeks. Maybe her father had been right about giving normal teenage life a chance. Maybe she could make friends and have experiences that didn't revolve around training schedules and competition brackets. Maybe Riverside High wouldn't be just something to endure until graduation. The afternoon classes passed more quickly than usual, and Emma found herself looking forward to 4th period biology, where she would see Jake again. When she arrived at the classroom, he was already at their lab table, setting up equipment for the day's experiment. How was your afternoon? He asked as she took her seat beside him. Better than usual, Emma replied honestly. I actually paid attention in English class instead of just watching the clock. They worked together on the lab assignment, their conversation flowing easily as they measured chemicals and recorded observations. Emma was struck by how natural it felt to have a friend again, someone she could talk to without constantly monitoring her words for fear of revealing too much about her background. As the final bell of the day rang and students began gathering their belongings, Emma felt a surge of optimism about her future at Riverside High. She had made it through another day, and for the first time, she was looking forward to the next. 1. The rain had stopped and pale sunlight was beginning to filter through the classroom windows. Emma packed up her materials slowly, savoring the feeling of belonging somewhere again. She was so focused on her positive thoughts that she almost missed the conversation happening at the lab table behind her. "Did you see how she was sitting at lunch today?" a voice was saying, "like she actually thinks she belongs here." "I know, right? It's kind of pathetic how desperate she is for attention." Emma's stomach tightened as she realized the conversation was about her. She kept her head down, pretending to organize her backpack while straining to hear more. "Ashley thinks she needs to be reminded of her place," another voice continued. "New girls who don't know how things work around here can be a problem." Emma's brief moment of happiness evaporated, replaced by the familiar weight of anxiety. She had been naive to think that flying under the radar would be enough to protect her. In her experience, bullies often targeted people not for standing out, but for the simple crime of existing in spaces they considered their own. Jake had finished packing his bag and was waiting for her by the door. Emma forced herself to smile as she joined him, not wanting to burden him with her concerns. They walked together toward the main entrance, their conversation returning to casual topics like homework assignments and weekend plans. As they reached the point where their paths diverged, Jake turned to Emma with a slightly serious expression. "Hey, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but if anyone gives you trouble here, you should know that you can talk to me about it. I know what it's like to feel like an outsider." Emma felt a flutter of gratitude mixed with concern. Jake's offer was kind, but she also didn't want to drag him into whatever conflict might be brewing with Ashley and her friends. "Thanks, Jake. I appreciate that." As she walked toward the student parking lot where her father would be picking her up, Emma reflected on the complexity of her situation. On one hand, she had found a genuine friend in Jake, someone who seemed to like her for who she was rather than what she could do for him. On the other hand, she was apparently already on the radar of the school's social power structure, which rarely ended well for anyone. Emma's father was waiting in his pickup truck, reading something on his phone. Carlos Rodriguez looked up as his daughter approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "How was school today, Mia?" "Actually, it was pretty good," Emma replied, climbing into the passenger seat. "I made a friend." Carlos started the engine, clearly pleased by this news. "That's wonderful. Tell me about this friend." As they drove through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls toward their rental house in the Maple Grove subdivision, Emma told her father about Jake and their conversation at lunch. She found herself editing the story slightly, emphasizing the positive aspects while downplaying her concerns about Ashley Parker and the overheard conversation. Carlos listened attentively, occasionally asking questions about Jake's interests or Emma's impressions of her teachers. Emma appreciated her father's genuine interest in her day-to-day life, even as she struggled with how much to share about her social concerns. "I'm proud of you for giving this a real chance," Carlos said as they pulled into their driveway. "I know the transition hasn't been easy, but it sounds like you're finding your way." Emma nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that her real challenges at Riverside High were just beginning. As she helped her father carry groceries into the house, she found herself thinking about the conversation she had overheard after biology class. Ashley Parker apparently had opinions about Emma's presence at the school, and in Emma's experience, popular kids with strong opinions about outsiders rarely kept those opinions to themselves. That evening, as Emma worked on homework at the kitchen table, she caught herself thinking about her training gear packed away in boxes upstairs. For the first time since arriving in Cedar Falls, she wondered if her father's advice about leaving her competitive fighting background behind might have been premature. Sometimes she reflected, the best way to avoid conflict was to make sure potential aggressors understood that you weren't an easy target. But then she thought about Jake's friendship and the possibility of having a normal high school experience, and she pushed those thoughts aside. Tomorrow was a new day, and maybe her concerns about Ashley Parker would prove to be unfounded. Maybe she was just being paranoid, reading too much into teenage gossip and social dynamics. Emma finished her homework and headed upstairs to bed, determined to approach the next day with optimism. She had survived much more challenging situations than high school social politics, and she was confident in her ability to navigate whatever came next. After all, how much trouble could a few popular kids really cause? As she drifted off to sleep, Emma had no idea that Ashley Parker was already planning her next move, or that her peaceful evening would be the last one she would have for quite some time. The next morning brought a deceptively calm atmosphere. To Riverside High School, Emma arrived early, having convinced her father to drop her off before his construction site meeting. The hallways were mostly empty, except for a few dedicated students cramming for first-period tests and teachers preparing their classrooms for the day ahead. Emma appreciated the quiet, using the time to organize her locker and review her notes without the usual chaos of crowded corridors. She had slept better than expected, her conversation with Jake having lifted her spirits enough to push aside her concerns about Ashley Parker and the overheard comments. In the clear light of morning, Emma wondered if she had been overreacting to typical teenage gossip. Perhaps her years of competitive fighting had made her too quick to perceive threats where none actually existed. As students began filing into the building, Emma noticed that the social dynamics she had observed the previous day were already reasserting themselves. The athletic crowd dominated the main hallway, their voices carrying easily over the general chatter as they discussed weekend games and upcoming practices. The academic achievers moved purposefully toward their first-period classes, their arms loaded with textbooks and project materials. The various cliques had their established territories, and everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Emma made her way to her first-period history class, settling into her usual seat near the back of the room. Mr. Daniels was known for his engaging lectures about World War II, and Emma found herself genuinely interested in the day's topic about resistance movements in occupied Europe. There was something about the stories of ordinary people finding extraordinary courage in impossible circumstances that resonated with her own experiences in competitive fighting. During the lesson, Emma noticed that several students were discreetly checking their phones, despite the school's policy against electronic devices during class time. She caught glimpses of social media notifications and text message alerts, the usual stream of teenage communication that never seemed to cease. Emma had always been more focused on her training and academics than on maintaining an active social media presence, which had sometimes made her feel disconnected from her peers in Phoenix. Here at Riverside High, that disconnection felt even more pronounced. The bell rang, signaling the transition to second period, and Emma gathered her materials along with the rest of the class. As she walked toward her chemistry classroom, she noticed an unusual amount of whispering and sideways glances from other students. At first, she attributed this to her continued status as the new girl, but there was something different about the quality of attention she was receiving. The glances seemed more pointed, the whispers more urgent. Emma tried to shake off her growing unease as she entered the chemistry lab and took her assigned seat. Her lab partner, a quiet girl named Sarah, was already setting up their equipment for the day's experiment. Sarah had been consistently friendly but reserved during their previous interactions, offering polite conversation without delving into personal topics. Today, however, Sarah seemed unusually fidgety, avoiding eye contact and fumbling with the laboratory materials. When Emma attempted to make casual conversation about the upcoming test, Sarah's responses were clipped and distracted. Emma found herself wondering if she had inadvertently offended her lab partner, or if something else was causing the girl's obvious discomfort. The chemistry lesson proceeded without incident, but Emma couldn't escape the feeling that she was being watched. Several times, she caught classmates glancing in her direction before quickly looking away when she met their eyes. The whispered conversations that had begun in the hallway seemed to continue in the classroom, creating an undercurrent of tension that made it difficult for Emma to concentrate on the lesson. When the bell rang for third period, Emma packed her materials slowly, hoping to catch Sarah for a quick conversation. However, her lab partner gathered her belongings with unusual haste and left the classroom without their typical exchange of pleasantries. Emma followed the flow of students into the hallway, her concern growing with each sideways glance and hushed conversation she encountered. The walk to her English literature class felt longer than usual, as if she was moving through a gauntlet of curious stares and whispered comments. Emma tried to maintain her composure, keeping her head up and her expression neutral, but inside she felt the familiar tightening of muscles that preceded a fight-or-flight response. Her years of competitive training had taught her to recognize when a situation was shifting from normal to potentially dangerous, and every instinct was telling her that something was wrong. Mrs. Henderson's English class was discussing symbolism in contemporary literature, a topic that normally would have captured Emma's full attention. Today, however, she found herself monitoring the classroom dynamics instead of focusing on the lesson. Students were passing notes with unusual frequency, and she caught several instances of phones being discreetly checked despite the strict classroom policy against electronic devices. Emma's anxiety spiked when she noticed Brittany Chun, one of Ashley Parker's close friends, sitting 2 rows ahead of her and occasionally turning to look in her direction. Brittany's expression was difficult to read, but there was something calculating in her gaze that made Emma's stomach clench with apprehension. When their eyes met, Brittany smiled, but it was the kind of smile that predators gave their prey. Just before striking, the class period seemed to drag on forever, with Emma barely able to process Mrs. Henderson's discussion of literary themes and character development. Her mind was racing through possible explanations for the changed atmosphere at school, but none of her theories felt adequate to explain the level of attention she was receiving. She had been careful to keep a low profile, avoiding conflicts, and maintaining her distance from the established social hierarchies. What could have happened overnight to make her the apparent center of so much interest? When the bell finally rang, Emma gathered her materials with deliberate calm, determined not to show how rattled she was feeling. As she stood to leave, Brittany Chun approached her desk with that same unsettling smile. "Hey, Emma," Brittany said, her voice carrying a false friendliness that immediately put Emma on guard. "How are you adjusting to life at Riverside High?" Emma studied Brittany's face, searching for clues about the girl's true intentions. "Fine, thanks. It's been an adjustment, but I'm getting used to it." "That's great to hear," Brittany continued, her tone remaining artificially sweet. "It can be hard being the new girl, especially when people don't really know who you are or where you came from." The comment felt loaded with meaning, though Emma couldn't decipher exactly what Brittany was implying. "I guess everyone's curious about new students," Emma replied carefully. Brittany's smile widened, and for a moment, Emma caught a glimpse of something genuinely malicious beneath the friendly facade. "Oh, we're definitely curious. In fact, some people have been doing a little research about you. It's amazing what you can find online these days, don't you think?" Emma's blood ran cold as the implications of Brittany's words sank in. Her family had been careful about their online presence, especially regarding her competitive fighting career, but determined people could find information if they knew where to look. Competition results, team photos, and local news coverage of her tournaments had all been posted on various websites over the years. "I'm not sure what you mean," Emma said, though her voice sounded strained even to her own ears. "I think you do," Brittany replied, her friendly mask slipping entirely. "But don't worry, Emma. I'm sure everything will work out just fine for you here at Riverside High." With that, Brittany turned and walked away, leaving Emma standing alone in the rapidly emptying classroom. Emma's hands were shaking slightly. As she finished packing her backpack, her mind racing through the possible consequences of her competitive background being discovered. She had hoped to keep that part of her life private, at least until she had established herself socially at the school. The walk to the cafeteria for lunch felt like a death march. Emma was acutely aware of every stare, every whispered conversation, every phone screen that was quickly hidden when she passed. The normal chaos of lunchtime seemed muted somehow, as if the entire school was holding its breath in anticipation of some coming drama. Emma spotted Jake at their usual table and felt a surge of relief at seeing a friendly face. However, as she approached with her lunch tray, she noticed that Jake's expression was troubled, and he was staring intently at his phone screen. When he looked up and saw her coming, his face registered a complex mixture of concern, confusion, and something that might have been awe. "Emma," Jake said as she sat down across from him, "we need to talk." Emma set down her tray with hands that were no longer steady. "What's going on, Jake?" "Everyone's been acting strange all morning, and Brittany Chun just had a very cryptic conversation with me after English class." Jake turned his phone around so Emma could see the screen, and her worst fears were immediately confirmed. The display showed a social media post featuring several photos from her competitive fighting career. There she was in fighting gear, holding championship belts, standing on podiums with gold medals around her neck. The images had been compiled into a collage with the caption, "Meet the real Emma Rodriguez, 5-time Arizona State kickboxing champion." Wonder why she didn't mention this little detail. Emma's stomach dropped as she realized the full scope of what had happened. Someone had not only discovered her competitive background, but had deliberately compiled the information into a social media post designed to expose her secret. The post had been shared across multiple platforms and had already garnered dozens of comments and reactions. How did they find this? Emma asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Jake scrolled through the comments section, his expression growing more concerned with each reaction. "It looks like Brittany Chun posted this early this morning. The comments are, well, they're pretty intense. Some people are impressed, others are saying you were trying to deceive everyone, and a few are making jokes about not wanting to mess with you." Emma read through some of the comments, her heart sinking with each one. Students were speculating about why she had hidden her fighting background, questioning whether she was dangerous, and debating whether the school administration should be notified. Some comments were supportive, praising her achievements and expressing admiration for her skills. Others were cruel, suggesting that she was a fraud or a show-off who thought she was better than everyone else. "This is a disaster," Emma said quietly, her appetite completely gone. "I never wanted anyone to know about this." Jake looked at her with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "Why not?" "I mean, this is incredible, Emma. You're a champion athlete. Most people would be proud to share something like this." Emma struggled to explain the complex reasons behind her desire for privacy. "It's complicated. My dad wanted me to have a normal high school experience without the pressure and expectations that come with being known as a competitive fighter. And honestly, people treat you differently when they know you can fight. Either they're scared of you, or they want to test themselves against you, or they assume you're looking for trouble." "But you're not looking for trouble," Jake said, though it sounded more like a question than a statement. "No, I'm not," Emma replied firmly. "Fighting is something I do in controlled environments with rules and referees. It's not about hurting people or proving I'm tough. It's about discipline, technique, and personal achievement. Jake nodded slowly, seeming to process this information. So what are you going to do now? I mean, the cat's pretty much out of the bag. Before Emma could respond, she became aware of a commotion near the center of the cafeteria. Ashley Parker had stood up at her usual table and was holding her phone above her head, apparently addressing the surrounding tables. Emma couldn't hear what Ashley was saying over the general noise of the cafeteria, but she could see that students were turning to look in her direction. "Oh no," Jake muttered, following Emma's gaze. "This is about to get much worse." Ashley's voice carried across the cafeteria as she addressed her growing audience. "I just think it's interesting that some people come to our school pretending to be one thing when they're actually something completely different. I mean, if you're going to lie about who you are, what else are you lying about?" Emma felt heat rising in her cheeks as she realized that Ashley was using her exposed background as ammunition for a public attack. The implication that Emma had been deceptive or dishonest by not immediately announcing her competitive achievements was both unfair and inflammatory. Students throughout the cafeteria were now openly staring at Emma, their expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion to excitement at the prospect of drama. Emma could feel the weight of their collective attention pressing down on her, making it difficult to breathe normally. "Maybe we should get out of here," Jake suggested quietly, clearly recognizing that the situation was escalating beyond casual gossip. Emma nodded, standing up from the table with as much dignity as she could muster. However, as she reached for her backpack, Ashley's voice rang out across the cafeteria once again. "Don't worry, everyone. I'm sure our mysterious new friend will be happy to give us a demonstration of her skills sometime soon." The comment was met with laughter and cheers from some students, while others seemed uncomfortable with the obvious challenge in Ashley's tone. Emma felt every muscle in her body tense as her training instincts responded to what her mind recognized as a direct threat. Jake touched her arm gently, pulling her attention away from Ashley's performance. "Come on, let's go to the library. We can talk there without an audience." Emma allowed Jake to guide her out of the cafeteria, though she was acutely aware of the conversations that erupted in their wake. As they walked through the hallways toward the library, Emma noticed that word of her revealed background was spreading rapidly. Students who had never paid attention to her before were now staring openly, and she could hear fragments of conversations about her competitive achievements. The library provided a welcome refuge from the chaos of the cafeteria. Jake led Emma to a quiet corner table where they could talk without being overheard by other students. Emma slumped into her chair, feeling emotionally drained by the morning's events. "I can't believe this is happening," Emma said, running her hands through her hair. 3 weeks of flying under the radar, and now I'm the center of attention. For all the wrong reasons. Jake leaned forward, his expression serious but supportive. "Look, I know this isn't what you wanted, but maybe it's not entirely bad. I mean, now people know that you're incredibly accomplished. That has to count for something." Emma shook her head. "You don't understand. When people know you can fight, they either expect you to be aggressive and violent, or they see you as a threat that needs to be neutralized. There's no middle ground. Is that what you're worried about? That Ashley and her friends see you as a threat?" Emma considered the question carefully. "Ashley strikes me as someone who doesn't like competition for attention or influence. Now that everyone knows I have skills that make me stand out, she's going to see me as a challenge to her position in the school's social hierarchy." Jake frowned. "So what do you think she'd do?" Emma's stomach clenched as she considered the possibilities. In her experience, bullies who felt threatened by their victims often escalated their behavior to dangerous levels. "I don't know, but I doubt she's done with me." That little performance in the cafeteria was just the beginning. The rest of the lunch period passed quietly, with Emma and Jake discussing possible strategies for managing the fallout from the morning's revelations. Jake suggested that Emma might consider talking to her teachers or the school administration about the situation. But Emma was reluctant to involve adults unless absolutely necessary. She had learned to handle her own problems, and she hoped that the initial excitement about her background would die down once students moved on to other sources of entertainment. The afternoon classes were a blur of uncomfortable attention and whispered conversations. Emma's teachers seemed unaware of the social media drama that had consumed the student body, but several of her classmates made pointed comments about her hidden talents. Most of the attention was merely curious, but Emma could sense an undercurrent of challenge from some students who seemed to view her revealed background as a provocation. In her final period biology class, Emma was relieved to find that Jake had saved her usual seat at their lab table. However, her relief was short-lived when she noticed that Brittany Chun and Madison Torres had positioned themselves at a nearby table, clearly eavesdropping on conversations and making comments designed to be overheard. "I just think it's weird when people aren't honest about who they are," Madison said loudly, her voice carrying across the classroom. "Like, what else is she hiding? Maybe she thinks she's better than everyone else," Brittany added, her tone dripping with false concern. "I mean, why else would you keep something like that secret?" Emma felt her jaw clench as she listened to the deliberate provocation. Her years of training had taught her to recognize when opponents were trying to goad her into making mistakes, and she forced herself to remain calm and focused on the fun v. lesson. Jake glanced at her with concern, clearly recognizing her growing tension. "Ignore them," he whispered. "They're just trying to get a reaction." Emma nodded, though she could feel her patience wearing thin. The constant attention and speculation were exhausting, and she was beginning to understand that her peaceful existence at Riverside High was effectively over. Ashley Parker and her friends had made it clear that they intended to make Emma's life difficult, and the revelation of her competitive background had given them the perfect ammunition. As the final bell of the day rang, Emma packed her materials, slowly, dreading the walk to the parking lot where her father would be waiting to pick her up. The hallways were filled with the usual end-of-day chaos, but Emma noticed that conversations seemed to pause when she passed, and she caught several students taking photos of her with their phones. Jake walked with her toward the main entrance, providing a buffer against some of the unwanted attention. "Are you going to tell your dad about what happened today?" he asked as they approached the doors. Emma considered the question. Her father had been so pleased about her progress at making friends and adjusting to life at Riverside High. She hated the thought of disappointing him or proving his concerns about her competitive background correct. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe I'll wait and see if things calm down over the next few days." Jake looked skeptical but didn't press the issue. "Well, if you need someone to talk to, you know where to find me." "And Emma? For what it's worth, I think your achievements are impressive. Anyone who has a problem with that is probably dealing with their own insecurities." Emma managed a small smile, grateful for Jake's continued support. "Thanks, Jake. I'm glad I have at least one friend who isn't treating me like a circus act." As they parted ways at the school entrance, Emma walked toward her father's pickup truck with a heavy heart. The day had been a disaster, and she had the sinking feeling that worse was yet to come. Ashley Parker had made it clear that she viewed Emma as a threat, and in Emma's experience, popular kids who felt threatened rarely stopped at social media posts and cafeteria commentary. Carlos Rodriguez looked up from his phone as Emma approached the truck, his expression immediately shifting to concern when he saw his daughter's troubled face. "Rough day, Mia?" Emma climbed into the passenger seat and buckled her seatbelt, trying to decide how much to share with her father. "Someone at school found out about my competitive background and posted it on social media. Now everyone knows, and some people aren't happy that I kept it private." Carlos started the engine, his expression thoughtful. "I see, and how do you feel about that?" Emma appreciated that her father didn't immediately launch into advice or reassurances. "Honestly, I feel like I've lost control of my own story. I wanted to be known for who I am now, not for what I accomplished in Arizona. But your achievements are part of who you are, Carlos pointed out gently. You can't separate your character from the discipline and dedication that made you a champion. Emma nodded, understanding her father's point, but still feeling overwhelmed by the day's events. I know that. It's just that now everyone has expectations and assumptions about me that I didn't want to deal with. As they drove through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, Emma found herself wondering if her father's vision of a normal high school experience had been naive from the beginning. Perhaps some secrets were too significant to keep hidden, and perhaps the skills and discipline that had made her a champion fighter were always going to be part of how she navigated the world. The conversation with her father helped Emma process some of her feelings about the day's events, but it didn't erase her growing concern about Ashley Parker's intentions. The girl's public comments in the cafeteria had felt like a declaration of war, and Emma's instincts told her that Ashley was just getting started. That evening, as Emma tried to focus on her homework, she found herself repeatedly checking her phone for new social media posts about her revealed background. The attention was slowly dying down as students moved on to other topics, but she noticed that Ashley and her friends continued to make pointed comments and share related content. Emma went to bed that night with a sense of foreboding that she couldn't shake. Her years of competitive fighting had taught her to trust her instincts about dangerous situations, and every fiber of her being was telling her that Ashley Parker was planning something much worse than social media harassment. She had no idea how right she was, or that Ashley's next move would cross a line that would force Emma to abandon her peaceful approach once and for all. The following morning arrived with an unseasonable warmth that had students at Riverside High discarding their jackets and opening windows in classrooms. Emma noticed the change in weather as she walked from her father's truck to the main entrance, but the pleasant sunshine did nothing to lift the weight of anxiety that had settled in her chest overnight. She had slept poorly, her dreams filled with scenarios of confrontation and escalating conflict that her subconscious mind seemed determined to prepare her for. The hallways buzzed with the typical morning energy of teenagers caffeinated and ready to face another day of classes, but Emma detected a subtle shift in the atmosphere around her. The previous day's revelation about her competitive fighting background had settled into the collective consciousness of the student body, creating a new dynamic that she was still learning to navigate. Some students offered her respectful nods or friendly smiles, apparently impressed by her achievements. Others seemed to go out of their way to avoid her, as if her fighting skills made her somehow dangerous to be around. Emma made her way to her locker, grateful for the few minutes of routine that organizing her materials provided. As she arranged her textbooks and notebooks for the day ahead, she overheard fragments of conversations that confirmed her suspicion that she remained a topic of interest among her classmates. Most of the comments were benign speculation about her training regimen or curiosity about her tournament experiences, but she also caught whispers that suggested some students viewed her presence at Riverside High with suspicion or resentment. The first period history class proceeded without incident, though Emma noticed that Mr. Daniel seemed to pay closer attention to her participation in the discussion than usual. She wondered if the teacher had heard about her revealed background and was curious about how her competitive experience might influence her academic performance. Emma had always been a conscientious student, but she found herself second-guessing her contributions to class discussions, worried that her comments might be interpreted through the lens of her fighting abilities. During the transition to second period, Emma encountered her first direct confrontation of the day. As she walked through the crowded hallway toward her chemistry class, a tall boy with a Letterman jacket stepped directly into her path, forcing her to stop abruptly. Emma recognized him as Derek Matthews, a senior on the football team who had a reputation for being aggressive both on and off the field. "So you're the famous kickboxer everyone's talking about," Derek said, his voice loud enough to attract the attention of nearby students. "I've been wondering when someone was going to challenge the tough guys around here." Emma kept her expression neutral, though she could feel her heart rate increasing in response to the obvious provocation. "I'm not here to challenge anyone. I just want to go to class." Derek stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly intended to intimidate. "That's not what I heard. Word is you think you're some kind of badass, because you can beat up little girls in tournaments." Emma felt her jaw clench at the deliberate insult, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I compete against trained athletes in regulated competitions. It's not about beating anyone up." "Sure it's not," Derek replied with a smirk. "Well, let me know when you want to test those skills against someone who can actually fight back." Before Emma could respond, Derek shouldered past her with unnecessary force, causing her to stumble slightly. The small crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation began to disperse, but Emma could hear murmurs of excitement about the potential for future conflict. She continued to her chemistry class with a growing sense that her peaceful existence at Riverside High was rapidly becoming impossible to maintain. The chemistry lesson was a welcome distraction from the morning's tension, but Emma found it difficult to focus on molecular structures and chemical reactions when part of her mind was occupied with calculating potential threats and escape routes. Her years of competitive training had developed her situational awareness to a fine degree, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched and evaluated by students who viewed her as either a curiosity or a challenge. During lunch, Emma was relieved to find Jake already seated at their usual table with a concerned expression on his face. She settled across from him with her tray, grateful for the company of someone who seemed to understand her desire to avoid unnecessary drama. "I heard about your encounter with Derek Matthews this morning," Jake said without preamble. "Are you okay?" Emma managed a small smile at his concern. "I'm fine. It was just typical posturing from someone who feels threatened by the idea that a girl might be able to handle herself in a fight." Jake frowned. Derek's not usually that confrontational with people he doesn't know well. Someone must have put him up to it. Emma glanced across the cafeteria toward Ashley Parker's table, where the blonde girl was engaged in animated conversation with her usual companions. "I have a feeling I know who might have encouraged him to test me." "Ashley's really getting under your skin, isn't she?" Jake observed. Emma considered the question carefully. "It's not that she's getting under my skin, exactly. It's that she's creating a situation where I'm going to be forced to respond to increasingly aggressive provocations. My dad always taught me that the best way to handle bullies is to avoid giving them what they want. But Ashley seems determined to escalate things until I have no choice but to defend myself." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "What is it that she wants, do you think?" Emma studied Ashley's table, noting the way the girl commanded attention from everyone around her and how her friends hung on her every word. "Control. She wants to maintain her position as the most important person in the school's social hierarchy, and she sees me as a potential threat to that status. If she can provoke me into doing something that gets me in trouble or makes me look bad, she eliminates the threat and reinforces her own power. So what are you going to do?" Emma picked at her sandwich, her appetite diminished by the stress of the morning's events. "I'm going to try to keep my head down and wait for the novelty to wear off. Eventually, people will get bored with talking about my fighting background and move on to something else." Jake looked skeptical. "What if Ashley doesn't get bored? What if she keeps pushing until you're forced to react?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "Then I'll handle it when the time comes. But I'm hoping it doesn't come to that." The rest of the lunch period passed quietly, with Emma and Jake discussing their afternoon classes and weekend plans. Emma appreciated Jake's ability to maintain normal conversation despite the unusual circumstances, and she found herself feeling grateful for his friendship and support. As they prepared to leave the cafeteria, however, Emma noticed that Brittany Chun was watching them intently from across the room, her expression calculating and predatory. The afternoon classes proceeded. Without major incident, though Emma continued to feel the weight of unwanted attention from her classmates. In her English literature class, she noticed that several students were discreetly taking photos of her with their phones, apparently documenting her presence for social media purposes. The constant surveillance was exhausting, and Emma found herself longing for the anonymity she had enjoyed during her first weeks at Riverside High. The final period of the day was physical education, a class that Emma had been dreading since her fighting background had been revealed. Coach Thompson was known for his competitive spirit and his tendency to encourage physical confrontation between students during sports activities. Emma worried that her presence in the class might create opportunities for other students to test themselves against her abilities. As she changed into her gym clothes in the locker room, Emma was acutely aware of the conversations happening around her. Several girls were discussing her revealed background in hushed tones, speculating about her training regimen, and wondering whether she would demonstrate her skills during class activities. Emma tried to ignore the whispers, but she couldn't escape the feeling that she was being studied like a specimen in a laboratory. Coach Thompson's lesson plan for the day involved team-based activities that required students to work together in small groups. Emma found herself partnered with 3 other girls, including Sarah from her chemistry class, who had been acting strangely distant since the revelation about Emma's fighting background. The activity involved relay races and coordination exercises that were designed to build teamwork and communication skills. As the class progressed, Emma noticed that her teammates seemed hesitant to engage with her fully, as if they were afraid of her physical capabilities. She tried to be encouraging and supportive, but she could sense their discomfort with her presence. The situation was frustrating and isolating, confirming her fears about how her competitive background would affect her relationships with other students. Near the end of the class period, Coach Thompson announced that students would have a few minutes of free time to use the gymnasium equipment or practice skills they had learned during the lesson. Emma decided to use the time to work on some basic stretching exercises, hoping to relieve some of the tension that had accumulated in her muscles throughout the day. As she moved through her stretching routine, Emma became aware that she was being watched by a group of students who had gathered near the gymnasium entrance. At the center of the group stood Ashley Parker, who was whispering something to her companions while keeping her eyes fixed on Emma's movements. Emma tried to ignore the attention, but she could feel her anxiety increasing as the group continued to observe her. When the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Emma quickly gathered her belongings and headed toward the locker room to change back into her regular clothes. She was looking forward to the end of another difficult day and the prospect of going home to the relative peace of her family's rental house in Maple Grove. However, as she entered the locker room, Emma immediately sensed that something was wrong. The usual chatter and activity of students changing clothes and gathering their belongings was notably absent. Instead, she found herself alone in the space, with only the sound of her own footsteps echoing off the tile walls. Emma approached her assigned locker with growing caution, her competitive instincts alerting her to the possibility of an ambush or confrontation. As she reached for her lock, she heard the distinctive sound of a phone camera capturing photos. She spun around to see Brittany Chun standing near the entrance to the locker room, her phone held high and clearly focused on Emma. "What are you doing?" Emma demanded, her voice sharp with alarm and indignation. Brittany smiled with obvious satisfaction. "Just documenting your presence at our school. You don't mind, do you?" Emma's blood ran cold as she realized the implications of Brittany's actions. The girl was photographing her in the locker room, a clear violation of privacy that crossed every boundary of acceptable behavior. Emma was partially undressed, having removed her gym shirt in preparation for changing back into her regular clothes. "Delete those photos right now," Emma said, her voice low and dangerous. Brittany's smile widened. I don't think so. These are going to be very popular on social media. Everyone's been so curious about the mysterious Emma Rodriguez, and now they'll get to see a more personal side of you. Emma felt a surge of rage that was unlike anything she had experienced since beginning her training as a child. The violation of her privacy was so complete and malicious that it triggered every protective instinct she possessed. Her hands clenched into fists as she fought to control her impulse to physically confront Brittany and destroy the phone. Those photos are illegal, Emma said, her voice trembling with barely controlled fury. You can't photograph someone without their consent. In a locker room. Brittany shrugged with apparent indifference. Prove it. Who's going to believe the word of a violent fighter over mine? Besides, you've been lying to everyone about who you really are. Maybe it's time for people to see the truth. Emma realized that she was trapped in an impossible situation. If she tried to physically take the phone from Brittany, she would be confirming everyone's worst assumptions about her aggressive nature. If she allowed Brittany to leave with the photos, she would be subjected to a humiliation that could destroy her reputation and her future at Riverside High. Please, Emma said, trying a different approach. Whatever problem you have with me, this isn't the way to handle it. Those photos could ruin my life. Brittany's expression showed no trace of sympathy or remorse. You should have thought about that before you decided to come to our school and pretend to be someone you're not. Actions have consequences, Emma. Maybe this will teach you to be more honest in the future. With that, Brittany turned and walked toward the locker room exit, her phone still in her hand and her posture radiating triumph. Emma stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing through possible responses to the crisis that was rapidly unfolding. She could chase after Brittany and try to stop her, but that would likely result in a physical confrontation that could get Emma suspended or expelled. She could report the incident to school authorities, but she had no proof of what had happened, and no guarantee that anyone would believe her word over Brittany's. Emma finished changing into her regular clothes with shaking hands, her mind reeling from the shock of Brittany's violation. She had never imagined that the conflict with Ashley Parker's group would escalate to this level of personal attack. The photographing of her in the locker room was not just cruel or humiliating. It was potentially criminal and could have lasting consequences for her reputation and her future. As she gathered her belongings and prepared to leave the locker room, Emma tried to process the full implications of what had just occurred. The photos would undoubtedly be shared on social media within hours, exposing her to ridicule and embarrassment from the entire student body. Her parents would inevitably learn about the incident, destroying their trust in her ability to handle the social challenges of high school. College recruiters and scholarship committees might see the images, potentially damaging her prospects for higher education. Emma walked through the empty hallways of Riverside High toward the main entrance, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The building felt different now, transformed from a place of learning and growth into a battlefield where she was fighting for her dignity and her future. She realized that Ashley Parker had succeeded in forcing her into an impossible position, where any response she chose would come with serious consequences. As she pushed through the doors into the afternoon sunlight, Emma saw her father's pickup truck waiting in the parking lot. Carlos Rodriguez was reading something on his phone, unaware of the crisis that had just engulfed his daughter's life. Emma approached the vehicle slowly, dreading the conversation that would inevitably follow once the photos began circulating online. She climbed into the passenger seat and buckled her seatbelt, trying to compose herself enough to appear normal. Her father looked up from his phone with his usual warm smile, but his expression quickly shifted to concern when he saw her face. "Emma, what's wrong? You look upset." Emma stared straight ahead through the windshield, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, I think I'm in serious trouble." Carlos set his phone aside and turned to face his daughter fully. "What kind of trouble? What happened?" Emma took a deep breath, trying to find the words to explain the violation she had just experienced. Someone took photos of me in the locker room without my permission. They're planning to post them online. Carlos's expression immediately darkened with a combination of anger and protective concern. Who did this? When did it happen? Emma gave her father a brief summary of her encounter with Brittany Chun, explaining the context of the ongoing conflict with Ashley Parker's group and the escalating harassment she had been experiencing since her fighting background was revealed. Carlos listened with growing fury, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as Emma described the violation of her privacy. "This is unacceptable," Carlos said when Emma finished her account. "We need to contact the school administration immediately and report this incident. What this girl did is illegal, and there will be consequences." Emma nodded, though she felt little optimism about the effectiveness of official channels. "I'm scared, Dad. Even if they get in trouble, the damage will already be done. Those photos could be everywhere by tomorrow." Carlos reached over and squeezed his daughter's shoulder. "We'll figure this out, Mia. But first, we need to get you home and start making phone calls. This cannot be allowed to stand." As they drove through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls toward their home in Maple Grove, Emma felt a fundamental shift occurring in her approach to the situation at Riverside High. The violation she had experienced was so severe and so personal that it had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Ashley Parker and her friends had declared war, and Emma was beginning to realize that her strategy of avoiding conflict was no longer viable. The peaceful existence she had hoped to maintain at her new school was over, destroyed by the malicious actions of students who viewed her as a threat to be eliminated. Emma stared out the window at the passing scenery, her mind already beginning to calculate the move she would need to make to protect herself and restore her dignity. She had spent 3 weeks trying to be someone she wasn't, hiding her true capabilities in the hope of fitting in with her new classmates. That strategy had failed spectacularly, and now she was facing the consequences of other people's actions. Emma realized that she could no longer afford to be passive in the face of aggression. The time for restraint was rapidly coming to an end, and she would need to decide how far she was willing to go to defend herself. As they pulled into the driveway of their rental house, Emma felt the last of her illusions about a normal high school experience crumble away. The photos Brittany had taken would be circulating within hours, and Emma knew that her life at Riverside High would never be the same. The question now was not whether she would be forced to fight, but when and how she would choose to respond to the escalating attacks on her dignity and her future. The quiet girl who had walked into Riverside High 3 weeks ago was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes the only way to end a conflict was to finish it decisively. Emma Rodriguez was about to remind everyone exactly why she had been a champion and why some people should never be underestimated or pushed too far. Emma spent the evening in her bedroom, staring at her phone screen as notifications poured in from various social media platforms. True to her threat, Brittany Chun had posted the locker room photos within an hour of taking them, and they had spread across the digital landscape of Riverside High like wildfire. The images showed Emma in her sports bra, captured from multiple angles as she changed clothes, with captions that mocked her athletic build and suggested she was seeking attention by hiding her true nature from her classmates. Carlos Rodriguez had spent hours on the phone with Principal Martinez, the school district's legal department, and local law enforcement, documenting the incident and demanding immediate action. The principal had assured him that the matter would be investigated thoroughly and that appropriate disciplinary measures would be taken. But Emma knew that official responses would take time, and the damage to her reputation was already spreading beyond any hope of containment. The comments on the posts ranged from supportive messages defending Emma's privacy to cruel jokes about her physique and fighting abilities. Some students expressed outrage at the violation of her privacy, while others seemed to view the incident as entertainment or justified retaliation for her perceived deception about her background. Emma read through the responses with a mixture of humiliation and growing rage, each cruel comment adding fuel to the fire that was building in her chest. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jake expressing his shock and support, but Emma found it difficult to respond coherently. The violation felt so complete and personal that she struggled to put her emotions into words. She had been reduced to an object of ridicule and speculation, stripped of her agency and dignity by people who viewed her as nothing more than a threat to be neutralized. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by dreams of confrontation and scenarios where she systematically dismantled every person who had contributed to her humiliation. Emma woke several times in a cold sweat, her body responding to imagined threats with the same adrenaline surge she experienced before competitive matches. By morning, she felt exhausted and hollow, as if the emotional trauma had drained her of everything except the burning desire for justice. Carlos knocked on her bedroom door as she was getting dressed for school, his expression grave and determined. "The principal wants to meet with us before classes start this morning. She's spoken with Brittany Chun and her parents, and there will be consequences for what happened yesterday." Emma nodded, though she felt little satisfaction at the prospect of official punishment for Brittany's actions. What kind of consequences? Suspension, possibly expulsion depending on the district's investigation. Taking photos of someone without consent in a locker room is considered a serious violation of privacy laws, and the school has zero-tolerance policies for this kind of behavior. Emma appreciated her father's efforts to seek justice through proper channels, but she also understood that punishment after the fact would not undo the damage that had already been done. The photos were circulating beyond the school's ability to control, and her reputation had been permanently altered by the incident. The drive to Riverside High was tense and quiet, with both Emma and her father lost in their own thoughts about the confrontation that lay ahead. Emma stared out the window at the familiar streets of Cedar Falls, wondering if she would ever feel safe or comfortable in this town again. The violation she had experienced had shattered her trust in the basic decency of her classmates and left her feeling isolated and vulnerable. Principal Martinez was waiting for them in her office, along with a district administrator and the school's guidance counselor. The meeting was formal and procedural, with Emma providing a detailed account of the incident while the adults took notes and asked clarifying questions. Emma appreciated their professionalism and obvious concern for her welfare, but she could sense that they were primarily focused on limiting the school's liability rather than addressing the broader pattern of harassment she had been experiencing. Brittany Chun has been suspended pending a full investigation, Principal Martinez explained after Emma finished her statement. "We've also contacted the parents of other students who shared or commented on the inappropriate photos, and they will face disciplinary action as well. The school's IT department is working to have the images removed from social media platforms, though I want to be honest with you about the limitations of our ability to control content once it's been widely shared." Emma nodded, having expected this response. What about Ashley Parker and Madison Torres? They've been orchestrating a campaign of harassment against me for weeks, and this incident was just the culmination of their efforts. The principal consulted her notes. "We found no direct evidence linking Ms. Parker or Ms. Torres to the taking or initial sharing of the photos. However, we will be investigating the broader context you've described and determining if any additional disciplinary measures are warranted." Emma felt a surge of frustration at the inadequacy of the school's response. Ashley Parker had been careful to maintain plausible deniability while directing her followers to do the actual harassment, a strategy that apparently made her immune to consequences. The system was designed to address individual incidents rather than patterns of behavior, leaving the primary instigator free to continue her campaign. After the meeting, Emma's father offered to take her home for the day, but she declined. Running away would only confirm her classmates' suspicions that she was weak and vulnerable, and she refused to give Ashley Parker the satisfaction of driving her from school. She would face whatever awaited her in the hallways and classrooms of Riverside High with dignity and strength. The first indication of how dramatically things had changed came as Emma walked through the main entrance. Conversations stopped as she passed, and students stared at her with a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and barely concealed excitement. Some offered supportive smiles or encouraging words, but others seemed to view her as a source of entertainment, their expressions anticipating drama and conflict. Emma made her way to her locker with deliberate calm, ignoring the whispers and sideways glances that followed her progress through the hallways. As she organized her materials for the day ahead, she overheard fragments of conversations that confirmed her suspicions about how the incident was being perceived by different segments of the student body. "I can't believe they did that to her," one girl was saying to her friend. "It's completely illegal and totally wrong." "She probably deserved it," another voice responded. "Why else would she lie about being some kind of fighter? She was obviously planning to start trouble." Emma felt her jaw clench at the suggestion that she deserved to have her privacy violated, but she forced herself to remain focused on her immediate goals. She would attend her classes, complete her assignments, and maintain her dignity regardless of what others thought or said about her situation. The morning classes passed in a blur of uncomfortable attention and whispered speculation. Emma's teachers seemed aware of the incident and made efforts to maintain normal classroom environments, but the undercurrent of tension was impossible to ignore. Several students approached Emma between classes to express their support or outrage at what had happened, but their sympathy felt hollow and insufficient given the magnitude of the violation she had experienced. During lunch, Emma found Jake waiting at their usual table with an expression of barely controlled anger. As she approached with her tray, he stood up and pulled out her chair with exaggerated courtesy, a gesture clearly intended to show his respect and support in front of the other students in the cafeteria. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. Once she was seated, Emma managed a weak smile. "I've been better, but I'm not going to let them drive me away." Jake nodded approvingly. "Good. What they did to you was unforgivable, and everyone with any decency knows it." Emma glanced around the cafeteria, noting the various groups of students and their apparent attitudes toward her situation. Some tables seemed supportive, with students occasionally glancing her way with sympathetic expressions. Others appeared to be engaged in animated discussions about the incident, their body language suggesting excitement rather than outrage. At the center of the room, Ashley Parker's table maintained its usual position of social prominence, though Emma noticed that Ashley herself was conspicuously absent. "Where's Ashley today?" Emma asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Jake's expression darkened. "Word is she's been called in for questioning about the harassment campaign. Apparently, some students came forward with information about how she's been orchestrating attacks against you since you arrived." Emma felt a glimmer of hope that justice might actually be served, but she remained skeptical about the likelihood of meaningful consequences for Ashley's behavior. Popular students from wealthy families had ways of avoiding serious punishment, and Emma doubted that the school administration would be willing to take strong action against someone with Ashley's social standing. As if summoned by their conversation, Brittany Chun appeared at their table with a defiant expression that suggested she felt no remorse for her actions. Despite being officially suspended, she had apparently returned to school to make some kind of statement or confrontation. "I hope you learned your lesson," Brittany said, directing her words at Emma with obvious hostility. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before lying to people about who you really are." Emma felt every muscle in her body tense as she looked up at Brittany's sneering face. The girl's complete lack of remorse and her attempt to justify criminal behavior as some kind of moral lesson pushed Emma beyond her carefully maintained limits of self-control. "What I learned," Emma said, her voice deadly quiet, is that some people are so insecure and pathetic that they'll commit crimes to make themselves feel important. Brittany's face flushed with anger. You think you're so tough because you can beat up little girls in some amateur tournaments? Why don't you try picking on someone who can actually defend themselves? Emma stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet cafeteria. Around them, conversations had stopped as students sensed the escalation of tension between the two girls. Emma could feel dozens of pairs of eyes watching her, waiting to see how she would respond to Brittany's challenge. You want to see what I can do? Emma asked, her voice carrying across the silent room. You violated my privacy, humiliated me in front of the entire school, and now you're standing here acting like you're the victim. I think it's time someone taught you about consequences. Jake reached out to touch Emma's arm, clearly concerned about where the confrontation was heading. Emma, don't let her bait you into doing something you'll regret. But Emma was beyond the reach of rational advice. The weeks of harassment, the violation of her privacy, and Brittany's complete lack of remorse had combined to create a perfect storm of justified rage. She had tried to handle the situation through proper channels, had endured abuse with patience and dignity, and had given her tormentors every opportunity to stop their campaign of harassment. Now it was time to end the conflict on her own terms. Meet me in the parking lot after school, Emma said, her eyes locked on Brittany's face. Just you and me. No phones, no friends, no audience. Let's see how tough you are when you can't hide behind other people. Brittany's confident expression flickered for a moment, revealing a flash of uncertainty beneath her bravado. You're seriously challenging me to a fight? That's your solution to everything? No, Emma replied, stepping closer until she was well within Brittany's personal space. Fighting is my solution to bullies who think they can destroy people without consequences. You wanted to see the real Emma Rodriguez? Congratulations. You're about to get exactly what you asked for. The cafeteria had fallen completely silent, with every student straining to hear the exchange between the two girls. Emma could sense the excitement and anticipation radiating from the crowd, their collective hunger for drama and conflict palpable in the air. She realized that this moment would define her entire experience at Riverside High, regardless of how the confrontation played out. Brittany glanced around the room, apparently seeking support or escape from the situation she had created. When she met Emma's steady gaze again, some of her defiance had crumbled, replaced by the dawning realization that she might have pushed the wrong person too far. Fine, Brittany said, though her voice lacked conviction. But don't come crying to me when you get expelled for fighting. Emma smiled for the first time in days, though there was no warmth in the expression. Don't worry about me. Worry about explaining to your parents why you needed medical attention. With that, Emma returned to her seat and calmly resumed eating her lunch, as if she had just scheduled a study session rather than a physical confrontation. The cafeteria gradually returned to its normal level of noise and activity, but Emma could feel the electric anticipation that had settled over the room like a storm cloud. Jake stared at her with a mixture of concern and admiration. Are you sure about this? I mean, I understand why you're angry, but fighting her isn't going to solve anything. Emma met his gaze steadily. Jake, I appreciate your concern, but this isn't about solving anything. This is about making sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. Bullies like Brittany and Ashley only understand one language, and I'm about to have a very clear conversation with her. The afternoon classes passed slowly, with Emma barely able to concentrate on her lessons as her mind focused on the coming confrontation. Word of the challenge had spread throughout the school with remarkable speed, and Emma noticed that students were watching her with new interest and respect. Even teachers seemed aware that something significant was brewing, though none of them addressed the situation directly. During her final period biology class, Emma found it impossible to focus on the lesson about cellular respiration. Her body was already preparing for combat, adrenaline beginning to flow as her competitive instincts awakened after weeks of forced dormancy. She had not trained seriously since arriving in Cedar Falls, but muscle memory and years of conditioning were not easily forgotten. Jake seemed increasingly nervous as the end of the school day approached. "Emma, maybe you should reconsider this. I mean, what if you seriously hurt her? What if there are legal consequences?" Emma appreciated Jake's loyalty and concern, but she had moved beyond the point where such considerations mattered. The legal consequences started when she took those photos. Everything that happens from now on is just cause and effect. When the final bell rang, Emma gathered her belongings with deliberate calm, while other students rushed past her toward the exits. She could feel the excited energy of the crowd that was undoubtedly gathering in the parking lot, drawn by the promise of witnessing a confrontation between the school's mysterious new student and one of Ashley Parker's inner circle. Emma walked through the hallways toward the main entrance with measured steps, her mind entering the focused state that had served her so well in competitive tournaments. She was aware of the students following her at a respectful distance, their whispered conversations creating a soundtrack of anticipation and excitement. The parking lot was already crowded with students who had abandoned their usual after-school activities to witness the confrontation. Emma noticed that someone had apparently spread the word beyond Riverside High, as she recognized faces from other schools in the area. Cell phones were already out and recording, despite her request for no audience or documentation. Brittany Chen was waiting near the center of the lot, surrounded by a supportive crowd that included Madison Torres and several other students from Ashley Parker's extended social circle. Emma noticed that Ashley herself was still absent, apparently content to let her followers handle the direct confrontation while she maintained her distance from potential consequences. Emma approached the makeshift arena that had formed in the parking lot, her expression calm and focused despite the chaos surrounding her. The crowd parted as she walked through, creating a clear path to where Brittany was waiting with obvious nervousness. "Last chance to apologize and walk away," Emma said when she reached the center of the circle. "Admit that what you did was wrong. Promise to leave me alone, and we can end this without anyone getting hurt." Brittany glanced around at her supporters, clearly drawing strength from their presence. "I'm not apologizing for anything. You brought this on yourself by lying to everyone about who you really are." Emma nodded, having expected this response. "In that case, I guess we're going to do this the hard way." The crowd pressed closer, phones held high to capture the coming confrontation. Emma ignored the audience, focusing entirely on Brittany's posture and positioning. Years of competitive fighting had taught her to read opponents quickly, identifying strengths, weaknesses, and preferred fighting strategies within seconds of engagement. Brittany was taller and heavier than Emma, with longer reach and apparently more experience with physical confrontation based on her confident demeanor. However, Emma could see that the girl's stance was awkward and unbalanced, suggesting limited formal training or natural fighting ability. Brittany was clearly counting on size and aggression to overwhelm Emma's smaller frame. "Whenever you're ready," Emma said, settling into a relaxed fighting stance that would have been familiar to anyone who had watched her compete in Arizona tournaments. Brittany charged forward with a wild swing aimed at Emma's head, putting all of her weight behind the attack in an apparent attempt to end the fight quickly. Emma sidestepped the clumsy assault with fluid grace, allowing Brittany's momentum to carry her past while simultaneously delivering a precise kick to the back of the girl's knee. Brittany stumbled and nearly fell, her face registering shock at Emma's speed and technical precision. The crowd gasped in appreciation of the smooth defensive maneuver, their excitement building as they realized they were witnessing a genuine display of martial arts skill. "That's your warning," Emma said calmly. "Stop now, or I stop you." But Brittany was too proud and too committed to back down. She recovered her balance and came at Emma again, this time with both fists flying in a desperate attempt to land a decisive blow. Emma weaved between the wild punches with practiced ease, her movements economical and controlled compared to Brittany's frantic aggression. When Emma finally countered, it was with a perfectly timed combination that demonstrated years of elite-level training. A sharp jab to Brittany's solar plexus doubled the girl over, followed immediately by an uppercut that straightened her back up. Emma finished the sequence with a spinning kick that caught Brittany in the ribs and sent her sprawling across the asphalt. The crowd erupted in cheers and amazement as Brittany struggled to get back to her feet, clearly stunned by the speed and power of Emma's attack. Several students were shouting commentary about Emma's technique, apparently recognizing genuine martial arts skills when they saw them. Brittany managed to stand up, though she was obviously hurt and struggling to catch her breath. Her face was flushed with pain and humiliation, but her eyes still burned with defiant anger. "You think you're so special because you can fight? Anyone can throw a few punches." Emma shook her head sadly. "No, Brittany, not anyone can do what I just did. And if you keep pushing, you're going to learn exactly how much you don't know about fighting." But Brittany was beyond rational thought, driven by pride and the desperate need to save face in front of her peers. She pulled out her phone and held it up threateningly. "Maybe I should take some more photos of you. I bet people would love to see you crying after I'm done with you." The threat to take more unauthorized photos triggered something primal in Emma's psychology. The violation of her privacy had been the catalyst for this entire confrontation, and Brittany's suggestion that she might repeat the offense crossed a line that obliterated Emma's remaining restraint. Emma moved with the fluid speed of a striking snake, closing the distance between them in 2 quick steps. Her hand shot out to grab Brittany's wrist, applying a joint lock that forced the girl to drop her phone while simultaneously controlling her ability to move or strike back. "Let me make something very clear," Emma said, her voice pitched low enough that only Brittany could hear her words. "If you ever take another photo of me or anyone else without permission, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. Do you understand me?" Brittany nodded frantically, her face contorted with pain from the joint lock. Emma maintained the hold for several more seconds, ensuring that the lesson was thoroughly learned before releasing her grip and stepping back. Brittany cradled her wrist against her chest, tears streaming down her face as the reality of her situation finally penetrated her stubborn pride. She had challenged someone far beyond her capabilities and paid the price for her arrogance and cruelty. "The next time you want to bully someone," Emma said, addressing not just Brittany but the entire crowd of witnesses, "remember this moment. Remember what happens when you pick on someone who refuses to be a victim." Emma turned and walked away from the confrontation, ignoring the cheers and applause from students who had been impressed by her demonstration of skill and restraint. She had proven her point without causing permanent injury, though she was confident that Brittany would carry the memory of this humiliation for years to come. As she approached the edge of the parking lot where her father's truck was waiting, Emma felt a profound sense of relief and closure. The confrontation had been inevitable from the moment Ashley Parker decided to target her, and she was grateful that it was finally over. She had handled the situation with appropriate force, defending her dignity without crossing the line into excessive violence. Carlos Rodriguez was waiting by his truck with an expression of concern and pride. He had obviously witnessed the entire confrontation, and Emma could see approval in his eyes, despite his worry about potential consequences. "Are you all right, Mia?" he asked as she approached. Emma nodded, feeling more centered and peaceful than she had in weeks. "I'm fine, Dad. Better than fine, actually. I think I just reminded everyone at this school that some people shouldn't be underestimated." As they drove home through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, Emma reflected on how dramatically her life at Riverside High had changed. She was no Longer, the quiet new girl trying to blend in and avoid attention. She was Emma Rodriguez, 5-time state kickboxing champion, and she was done hiding who she really was. The photos that had been taken of the fight would undoubtedly circulate on social media, but Emma no longer cared about unwanted attention or speculation about her abilities. She had drawn a clear line in the sand, and anyone who chose to cross it would face the same consequences that Brittany Chun had just experienced. More importantly, Emma realized that she had learned something valuable about herself during her time at Riverside High. She didn't have to choose between being a skilled fighter and being a good person. She could be both, using her abilities to protect herself and others while maintaining the discipline and restraint that her father had taught her. The next morning, Emma walked through the halls of Riverside High with confidence and dignity. Students moved aside as she passed, offering respectful nods and genuine smiles rather than the mocking stares and whispered insults she had endured for weeks. Ashley Parker was conspicuously absent, apparently having decided that continuing her harassment campaign was no longer worth the risk. Emma found Jake waiting at her locker with a huge grin on his face. "So, how does it feel to be the most respected student at Riverside High?" Emma smiled back, feeling genuinely happy for the first time since arriving in Cedar Falls. "It feels like I can finally be myself. No more hiding, no more pretending to be someone I'm not, and no more bullies, I'm guessing." Emma nodded, though her expression grew serious. "There will always be bullies, Jake, but now everyone knows that I'm not an easy target. Sometimes that's all the protection you need." As they walked toward their first period class together, Emma felt genuinely optimistic about her future at Riverside High. She had found her place in the school's social ecosystem, not through popularity or conformity, but through strength, integrity, and the willingness to stand up for herself when others tried to tear her down. The quiet girl who had arrived in Cedar Falls hoping to blend in was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true strength came not from hiding your abilities, but from using them wisely and with purpose. Emma Rodriguez was home at last, comfortable in her own skin and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The weeks following the parking lot confrontation transformed Emma's experience at Riverside High in ways she never could have anticipated. What had begun as a desperate attempt to defend her dignity had evolved into something far more significant, a complete restructuring of the school's social dynamics and her own understanding of leadership and responsibility. The video of her fight with Brittany Chun had indeed gone viral, but not in the way Emma had feared. Rather than portraying her as an aggressive troublemaker, the footage clearly showed her restraint, technique, and the defensive nature of her actions. Comments poured in from viewers around the world, praising her self-control and the way she had handled a bully who had violated her privacy. Several martial arts instructors and former competitors reached out through social media to express their admiration for how she had represented their sport. More importantly, the incident had sent a clear message throughout Riverside High that Emma Rodriguez was not someone to be trifled with. The harassment that had plagued her since her arrival in Cedar Falls ceased entirely, replaced by a respectful distance that allowed her to navigate the school's hallways without constant anxiety about potential confrontations. Ashley Parker had returned to school after a 3-day suspension, but her reign as the unchallenged queen of Riverside High's social hierarchy was effectively over. The investigation into the harassment campaign had revealed the extent of her orchestrated attacks against Emma, resulting in formal disciplinary action and a permanent mark on her academic record. More damaging than the official consequences, however, was the loss of her social influence as students began to question her character and leadership. Emma found herself in the unexpected position of being sought out by classmates who had previously ignored her existence. Students approached her between classes to express their support for how she had handled the situation, and many shared their own experiences with bullying or harassment. Emma began to realize that her confrontation with Brittany had resonated with far more people than she had expected, inspiring others who had felt powerless in the face of social aggression. The most significant change, however, was Emma's own transformation from a reluctant participant in high school social dynamics to an active advocate for students who found themselves targeted by bullies. She had not sought this role, but it seemed to have found her naturally as word spread about her willingness to stand up for others. The first test of this new dynamic came 3 weeks after the parking lot incident, when Emma witnessed a group of seniors harassing a freshman named Marcus Chun in the hallway outside the library. Marcus was a quiet, studious boy who reminded Emma of herself during her first weeks at Riverside High, and the aggressive behavior of his tormentors triggered every protective instinct she possessed. "Leave him alone," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly down the hallway as she approached the group. The seniors turned to face her, their expressions shifting from amusement to wariness as they recognized who was confronting them. The leader of the group, a football player named Trevor Walsh, had been present during Emma's fight with Brittany and clearly remembered the outcome of that confrontation. "This doesn't concern you, Emma," Trevor said, though his tone lacked the confidence he might have displayed with other students. "We're just having a conversation with our friend Marcus here." Emma glanced at Marcus, who was pressed against his locker with obvious fear and distress written across his face. "Marcus, do you want to have this conversation with them?" Marcus shook his head emphatically, his voice barely audible as he whispered, "No, I just want to go to class." Emma returned her attention to Trevor and his companions, her stance shifting subtly into a more assertive posture. "Then I think your conversation is over. Marcus, come with me." Trevor stepped forward, apparently unwilling to back down in front of his friends. "You think you can just walk around this school, acting like you own the place? We were here long before you showed up." Emma met his gaze steadily, her voice remaining calm despite the obvious challenge in his words. "I don't want to own anything, Trevor. I just want students to be able to go to school without being harassed or intimidated. If you have a problem with that, we can discuss it privately." The implicit threat in her words was clear to everyone present, and Trevor's companions began to look uncomfortable with the escalating situation. Emma had established her reputation as someone who could back up her words with action, and none of them seemed eager to test her capabilities. "Whatever," Trevor muttered, apparently deciding that his pride was not worth the potential consequences of challenging Emma. "Come on, guys. Let's find something better to do." As the group dispersed, Emma turned to Marcus with a gentle expression that contrasted sharply with the steel she had shown moments earlier. "Are you okay? Do you want to talk about what was happening?" Marcus nodded gratefully, his voice shaking slightly as he explained the systematic harassment he had been experiencing since the beginning of the school year. The seniors had been targeting him because of his academic achievements and his reluctance to participate in social activities, using their size and social status to intimidate him into compliance with their demands. Emma listened with growing anger as Marcus described tactics that were remarkably similar to what she had experienced from Ashley Parker's group. The pattern of isolation, humiliation, and escalating aggression was depressingly familiar, and she realized that her own experience had been part of a much larger problem at Riverside High. "This stops now," Emma told Marcus firmly. "If they bother you again, you find me immediately. Nobody deserves to be treated like that." Word of Emma's intervention on Marcus's behalf spread quickly through the school, further cementing her reputation as someone who would protect vulnerable students from predatory behavior. Over the following weeks, she found herself approached by other students who had been targeted by bullies, each seeking her assistance or simply wanting to know that someone was willing to stand up for them. Emma began to understand that her role at Riverside High had evolved far beyond simply defending herself. She had become a protector and advocate for students who lacked the ability or confidence to defend themselves, a responsibility that she took seriously despite never having sought it. The realization that she could use her skills and reputation to help others led Emma to approach Coach Thompson about starting a martial arts club at the school. The coach had been following Emma's story with interest and was enthusiastic about the possibility of channeling her abilities into a positive program that could benefit other students. "I think it's a fantastic idea," Coach Thompson said when Emma presented her proposal. "We've needed something like this for years. Too many students feel helpless when they're confronted with aggression, and learning basic self-defense skills could make a real difference in their confidence and safety." Emma worked with Coach Thompson and Principal Martinez to develop a comprehensive martial arts program that would focus on discipline, self-control, and practical self-defense techniques. The program would be open to all students regardless of experience level, with Emma serving as a student instructor under Coach Thompson's supervision. The Martial Arts Club held its first meeting on a Tuesday afternoon in the school gymnasium, with Emma feeling nervous about her new role as a teacher and mentor. She had competed at the highest levels of her sport, but working with beginners required a different set of skills that she was still developing. To her surprise, more than 30 students showed up for the initial meeting, including several who had been involved in the harassment campaigns against her and others. Emma was initially skeptical about the motivations of some attendees, but she decided to give everyone a chance to prove their sincerity. "Before we start learning any techniques," Emma addressed the group, "I want to make something clear. Martial arts is not about hurting people or settling scores. It's about discipline, respect, and protecting yourself and others when necessary. If anyone is here because they want to learn how to be a better bully, they can leave now." The seriousness of her tone and the authority in her voice made it clear that she would not tolerate any misuse of the skills she was teaching. Several students exchanged glances, and Emma noticed that a few of the attendees seemed to be reconsidering their participation. "The first thing you need to understand," Emma continued, "is that real martial arts begins with respect. Respect for your instructors, respect for your training partners, and most importantly, respect for yourself. If you can't show respect, you can't learn to fight." Emma spent the first several meetings focusing on basic principles of martial arts philosophy and discipline rather than actual fighting techniques. She wanted to ensure that every student understood the ethical framework that governed the use of martial arts skills before she taught them anything that could be used to harm others. Jake attended the meetings as a supportive friend rather than a serious student, but Emma was pleased to see him making an effort to understand the principles she was teaching. "I never realized how much thought goes into this stuff," he commented after one session. "I always thought martial arts was just about kicking and punching." Emma smiled at his observation. "That's what most people think, but the physical techniques are actually the least important part. The real value is in the mental discipline and the way it changes how you approach conflict and adversity." As the weeks progressed, Emma began to see genuine changes in some of the students who were consistently attending the martial arts club meetings. Marcus Chen had joined the group after his encounter with Trevor Walsh, and Emma watched with satisfaction as his confidence grew along with his understanding of basic self-defense principles. More surprisingly, several students who had been known for bullying behavior also seemed to be genuinely embracing the philosophy of respect and discipline that Emma was teaching. Trevor Walsh himself had joined the club after a few weeks, apparently seeking to understand the person who had so effectively neutralized his aggressive behavior. "I want to apologize," Trevor said to Emma after one particularly intense training session. "I was wrong about you, and I was wrong about how I've been treating other students. I didn't realize how much damage I was doing." Emma studied his expression, searching for signs of insincerity or manipulation. "What changed your mind?" Trevor gestured toward the other students who were practicing techniques in pairs around the gymnasium. "Watching you teach this stuff, seeing how you handle conflict without being cruel or vindictive." I realize that being strong doesn't mean making other people weak. Emma nodded, pleased by his insight. That's exactly right. Real strength is about lifting others up, not tearing them down. If you can remember that, you'll be fine. The transformation in Trevor's behavior was remarkable and genuine, and Emma began to use him as an example of how martial arts training could change someone's fundamental approach to interpersonal relationships. He became one of her most dedicated students and eventually one of her assistant instructors, helping to teach newer members of the club. As the semester progressed, Emma noticed that the overall atmosphere at Riverside High was changing in subtle but important ways. The culture of harassment and intimidation that had seemed so pervasive during her first weeks at the school was gradually being replaced by a more respectful and supportive environment. Students who had previously been targeted by bullies were finding their voices and standing up for themselves, often with the support of others who had learned to recognize and interrupt predatory behavior. The martial arts club had become a gathering place for students from diverse backgrounds and social groups, united by their commitment to the principles of respect and mutual support. Emma's academic performance had also improved dramatically, as the stress and anxiety of constant harassment were replaced by a sense of purpose and belonging. Her teachers noted her increased participation in class discussions and her willingness to take on leadership roles in group projects. Mrs. Henderson, her English literature teacher, pulled Emma aside after class one day to express her admiration for the positive changes she had observed. "I've been teaching for 20 years, and I've rarely seen a student have such a positive impact on the entire school community. You should be very proud of what you've accomplished." Emma felt a deep sense of satisfaction at the recognition, but she also understood that her work was far from finished. Changing a school's culture was an ongoing process that required constant attention and reinforcement of positive behaviors. The most significant test of the new dynamic came during the spring semester, when a group of students from a rival school attempted to provoke a confrontation with Riverside High students during a basketball game. The visiting students had apparently heard about Emma's reputation and wanted to challenge her directly, seeing it as an opportunity to gain status and respect among their own peers. Emma was attending the game with Jake and several other members of the martial arts club when the provocations began. The visiting students made loud comments about Emma's fighting abilities and challenged her to prove herself against real competition, rather than just school bullies. Emma felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded a potential confrontation, but she also recognized the situation as an opportunity to demonstrate the principles she had been teaching. Rather than responding with aggression or accepting the challenge, she chose a different approach. "I appreciate the compliment," Emma said, addressing the group of visiting students with calm confidence. "But I'm not here to fight tonight. I'm here to watch my school's basketball team and enjoy the game with my friends." The visiting students seemed taken aback by her refusal to engage with their provocations, having expected her to respond defensively or aggressively. Their leader, a large boy with obvious athletic training, pressed the challenge further. "So you're all talk then? Just another fake tough girl who can't back up her reputation?" Emma smiled at the familiar taunt, recognizing the same tactics that had been used against her by Ashley Parker and her followers. "I have nothing to prove to you or anyone else. My reputation speaks for itself." The visiting student stepped closer, apparently hoping to intimidate Emma into a response. "Maybe you need a reminder of what real fighting looks like." Before Emma could respond, Trevor Walsh and several other members of the martial arts club moved to positions around her, their body language making it clear that any threat to Emma would be met with unified resistance. The show of solidarity and support from her students sent a powerful message about the community she had helped create at Riverside High. "I think you're outnumbered," Trevor said calmly, his voice carrying the same controlled confidence that Emma had taught him. "Maybe you should focus on watching the game instead of starting trouble." The visiting students looked around at the growing crowd of Riverside High students who had gathered to support Emma, and their bravado began to crumble as they realized they were facing a unified community rather than an isolated individual. Without further provocation, they retreated to their seats and spent the rest of the game in sullen silence. Emma felt a surge of pride as she watched her students demonstrate the principles she had been teaching them. They had stood up to intimidation without resorting to violence, showing strength through unity and mutual support rather than individual aggression. After the game, Emma was approached by Principal Martinez, who had witnessed the entire incident. "I want to thank you for how you handled that situation," the principal said. "Your restraint and leadership prevented what could have been a very serious incident." Emma nodded respectfully. "That's what we've been working on in the martial arts club. Sometimes the best way to win a fight is to avoid having one." Principal Martinez smiled at the wisdom in Emma's words. "I think you've learned something that many adults never figure out. You should consider a career in education or counseling. You have a natural ability to help people grow and change." As Emma's junior year at Riverside High drew to a close, she reflected on the incredible journey she had experienced since arriving in Cedar Falls. What had begun as an attempt to hide her true nature and blend in with her classmates had evolved into a transformative experience that had changed not only her own life but the lives of countless other students. The martial arts club had grown to over 50 regular members, with Emma training a core group of advanced students who were helping to teach newcomers. The program had become so successful that other schools in the area were requesting information about how to start similar clubs in their own communities. Emma had also been approached by several universities about their martial arts programs, with coaches expressing interest in her competitive background and her demonstrated leadership abilities. The future that had seemed so uncertain during her first weeks at Riverside High now appeared bright with possibilities. Most importantly, Emma had learned to integrate all aspects of her identity into a coherent whole. She was no longer the quiet girl trying to hide her abilities or the aggressive fighter responding to every provocation. She had become someone who could use strength and skill in service of principles and values that made her community better. On the last day of school, Emma stood in the gymnasium where she had taught so many lessons about respect, discipline, and the responsible use of power. The space was filled with students from the martial arts club who had gathered to celebrate the end of another successful year and to thank Emma for her guidance and leadership. "When I first came to Riverside High," Emma addressed the group, "I thought I had to choose between being strong and being good. I thought I had to hide who I was in order to fit in and be accepted. I was wrong about a lot of things." The students listened intently as Emma continued her reflection on the year's events. "I learned that real strength isn't about defeating your enemies or proving that you're tougher than everyone else. Real strength is about protecting people who can't protect themselves and helping others discover their own power and potential." Emma looked around the room at the faces of students who had become not just her pupils, but her friends and allies. "You've all taught me as much as I've taught you. You've shown me that change is possible, that people can grow and become better versions of themselves, and that a community united by shared values is stronger than any individual." As the gathering concluded and students began to disperse for the summer, Emma felt a deep sense of accomplishment and gratitude. She had found her place not just at Riverside High but in the world, understanding her role as someone who could use her gifts to make a positive difference in the lives of others. Jake approached her as she was packing up her training equipment, his expression thoughtful and appreciative. "You know, when I first met you in the cafeteria, I thought you were just another quiet new student trying to fit in. I had no idea you would end up changing the entire school." Emma smiled at her friend's observation. "I didn't change the school, Jake. I just showed people that they had the power to change themselves. Everyone who made the effort to grow and become better, they did that on their own." As Emma walked out of Riverside High for the last time, as a junior, she carried with her the knowledge that she had discovered her true calling. She would continue to compete in martial arts, pursue her education, and work toward her goals. But she would also continue to use her platform and abilities to help others find their own strength and courage. The girl who had arrived in Cedar Falls hoping to hide her true nature had become a young woman who understood that authenticity, courage, and compassion were the most powerful tools for creating positive change in the world. Emma Rodriguez had found her voice, and she intended to use it to make sure that no one would ever have to face their bullies alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.